Okay, so unfortunately, I did a recording already and it didn't work. So I have to do it again. So this time I'm going to do two parts of the video. So you'll just have a part 1 and part 2 just to make sure that this does not happen to me again. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of a review from last week. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I will review our slides from last week. So I'll just skip a few things. When we're looking at program design, again, you need to consider the following factors. So remember, progressive overload is important. The specificity of training, is it specific to the sport or your client's goals? And then the last one was variation. So again, I'm not going to go into all the detail, but it is important to vary the exercises so you're not doing the exact same thing every workout. Even if you are going up in weight, you can't just do a barbell back squat for, 3 years, and that's the only variation of a squat you're doing, because you will eventually plateau. Okay. We talked about these examples last week, just some examples of specificity, of different exercises that you could do to help improve different skills in a sport. Okay, so again, the importance of periodization is to put our body under a specific level of stress in order to enhance our performance, okay? But to the point where we're not overtraining, and the whole point is to get over our plateaus. As you become more advanced, it is much harder to make progressions. So why is periodization important? As we just said, it can prevent overtraining and also reduce the risk of injury, and then help to improve performance over a longer duration. Okay, so we talked also about different concepts related to periodization and how we adapt to basically the different components of periodization. So we talked about the general adaptation syndrome, the stimulus fatigue recovery adaptation theory, and the fitness fatigue theory. So I'll just take you through them again, just very briefly and quickly reviewing what we talked about last week. So the general adaptation syndrome is composed of 3 phases, and I'll just bring them all up here. So the first phase is the alarm phase. So this is when we introduce a new stress to our body that's obviously more intense than what we've previously experienced, and so our body is in a little bit of a shock, and you may feel sore, you may feel fatigued, and you may notice your performance goes down. So for example, if you did a really hard leg workout, the next day you're probably going to be very sore, and you probably won't be able to do the same workout again the next day, because our body needs to adapt first to that workout and the stress that we just placed on our body, which brings us to the resistance phase. So that's the next phase, where our body is now adapting to that stimulus and then can return to normal functioning. And so we get into this phase, and the term is supercompensation, where we find an increased performance if we program appropriately for the client. So obviously, the supercompensation has to be fine-tuned with the program, and we're not just, gradually increasing for 3 months without a break, because it's usually that deload week or recovery week where we get supercompensation happening afterwards, and we're going to see that improved performance. And we talked about last week as well, after 14 days, or 2 weeks, greater than that period of time is where we may find detraining to occur. So that's if we're deloading significantly from what we are normally used to, or we just stop working out for greater than 2 weeks, we're going to see detraining probably occur. And the last phase, which we hope we don't get to, is that exhaustion phase, which is basically overtraining. And this is where we're probably going for too long without taking a break or a deload week. And we also may have other stress in our life, such as our job, such as we're not sleeping enough, maybe we're not eating properly. And so this can definitely affect how we're responding and adapting to our workouts. So again, you do need to consider your client or your athlete's life outside of the sport or the gym, because that can definitely affect how you're adapting. And you probably notice yourself, if you are in exam period or during a stressful time in your life, your performance in your workouts may be suffering a little bit as well. And you may not be able to get personal records if that's your goal, because of external factors that are affecting your performance. All right. And then the next theory, I'll just bring it all up here, is that stimulus fatigue recovery adaptation theory. So the whole point of this is basically we are going to fatigue from our workouts, and that's normal. But usually fatigue will dissipate faster than your fitness would. So it's not going to take you 2 weeks for your fatigue to go away, unless you have other things going on that are causing you to be fatigued. However, if you have a really high training load, then you are going to obviously take a longer time to recover. If you have a lower training load, then it may not take as long. But as I said, if you are not introducing a new stimulus, okay, and we talked about this last week. So again, just referring to the third point right here. So if you're not introducing a new stimulus, you will not make any more adaptation. You may plateau, and you may just maintain your fitness, which may be all you want. But if you want to continue to improve your fitness, you do need to introduce a new training stimulus. So that's what that point means. Not saying that if you continue what you're doing, you're going to get less fit. You're just going to maintain the level of fitness that you've built up. Okay? And again, you don't have to get a full state of recovery before you get into your new bout of training. Okay, so if you're still a little sore, but you've recovered for 2 days, and I mean, you're not where you're crippling going up the stairs or anything like that after a hard leg workout, then you should be okay to go on to the next workout. So that's where you don't have to be like fully recovered. You can feel better, but you don't have to be 120%. Okay. Moving on to this graph here. So I'll go through it again very quickly. The purple line is indicating preparedness and performance. And so when we introduce a new training stimulus, we're going to get into that alarm or shock phase, and we're going to get an acute response where we feel fatigued, we feel sore, and that could be a few days or maybe a few weeks of a stimulus, and you're going to fatigue. Okay, then you're going to move into the next phase, which is the recovery phase, where that's where you take a day or two off, or you take that deload week, which I've been talking about. And that's where you're going to recover from the demands that you're placing on your body. And then after you get back into your training, after your recovery period, this is where that super compensation may occur. And that's where your performance will go up, and you may, hit personal records at that point. Now, the thing is, if you stop training, again, you would just hopefully get into the super compensation. Then you may recover a little bit, depending on what activity you're doing. And then you can repeat the same, basically, training stimulus again, or even higher training stimulus. But if you just stop working out for like 2 weeks and you're not doing much after you've peaked, then you're going to detrain a little bit and reduce your preparedness and performance. Okay? But if you just stop for a week, you may go down a little bit, but once you introduce your new stimulus again, you'll go through the exact same kind of curve here. We'll bring it to the next slide, which is the same curve, just with a few extra points. So again, you could have an accumulated or concentrated load. I'm going to add here, I want this laser pointer. Yeah. Okay. So you could have accumulated or concentrated loading. So again, that could be through a period of time and not necessarily just one session. But this could apply to one session as well. And then you would recover for either a few days or a few weeks. Then remember, we supercompensate, we peak. And then if you detrain and stop, then you would reduce your preparedness and performance. So this is just a simple way to explain how we adapt to the fatigue and how you need recovery in order to adapt from your training. Okay? So the last theory we talked about was the fitness fatigue theory, where again, with every training bout, we're going to get fatigue. And as I said before, high loads, you're going to get higher level of fatigue. Lower loads, you're not going to fatigue as much, but you also will not get as much of a fitness improvement if you aren't going at a load that's enough to stimulate you. However, your fatigue will dissipate faster than your fitness, so you're not, again, going to lose fitness if you are fatigued. So if you took a day or two off because you're fatigued, that's okay, and you're probably not going to lose much fitness from those couple of days. Okay? And so that's basically the fitness fatigue theory. And then reviewing this chart, just very briefly, we have the different periods. So you can look at your annual training plan, which could be a macro cycle. Remember, a macro cycle could be a year, or it could be even 4 years if you are an Olympic athlete training for the Olympics. And so today we're really going to focus on these periods here. So we have the preparation phase. Then we go into our first transition period. Just a reminder, this is a typo. So this is your first transition period. Then you go into your competition, and then your second transition period. Remember, the competition period could be one single event, or it could be over several weeks or months. If we're looking at it as a season, we can see everything kind of aligned. So preparation would be off-season, transition times would be pre- and post-season, and competition would be in your season. And then within all these periods, we're going to go through different phases of our focus. So we'd start off with a hypertrophy phase, then a basic strength, then hypertrophy again, and basic strength, and then move into an active recovery. And then in preseason, now we're strength power focus. Okay, so we'll break this down a little bit more today as we go on into the periodization chart. Okay. So just a review of the different cycles. We have the macro cycle, which is the largest division, usually a year, could be up to 4 years if you are an Olympic athlete. Then we have mesocycles, which could consist of several weeks to several months. And again, this really depends on your athlete's goals. And you could repeat about 5 mesocycles more than once a year. And that can show greater strength and power gains by repeating that. So instead of having like 2 mesocycles, having at least 5, repeating them would be beneficial. And then the last component is the microcycles, which could be 1 week or 4 weeks as well. And this includes our daily and weekly training variations. And we're going to talk about this as we go through some examples later on today. Okay, so now we're going to break down the periodization period. So again, going back to our charts, we're going to be talking about this component, our preparatory. I'll highlight this for you. We're going to be talking about this period here. Okay, and that's what we're going to be focusing on with our chart. Okay, we talked about this last week. I just want to highlight volume. Wow, that is really slow. Whee. Volume and intensity. Okay, so as we are going through our training in the preparatory period, we're starting with high volume and low intensity. As we move on towards competition period, we see decreased volume and increased intensity as we move on through our training program. Okay, and obviously we cannot increase volume and intensity together. We will most likely either become overtrained or get injured. Okay, so that's just a brief summary of that slide. Okay, So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just briefly go through this chart. We're going to break down each one. I'll probably stop the recording and start another recording as I go through each one, just to make sure I do not lose anything this time, because I already wasted, I think, like an hour and a half of my time already. Okay, so going here into the preparation phase. So we're here in the preparation. So we start with hypertrophy and endurance, move to basic strength, then strength and power, as we now transition before our competition. We'll talk about the first transition, what that usually consists of. And again, usually it's that deload, okay, before we peak before a competition. So the variables we're going to be looking at is intensity and volume. Okay, so pretty much as we start off, we're going to start off at low intensity, high volume. And as we move closer to our competition, intensity goes up and volume goes down. As we talked about, you may have one competition or you may have a competition period. So if you have one competition, you're most likely peaking for that competition. And if you are in a sport where you're competing, over several months, you're going to try to maintain everything that you've built up in that preparation phase, because you don't want to try and make any further improvements because you are also competing, and that obviously takes a lot of energy to do so, and you're probably going to get injured if you're focusing on both at the same time. And then the last component is that second transition period where we do active rest. Sorry about that. We do active rest, and we're doing activities not related to our sport. And we're not really relating to anything that we've done in the preparation period. It's just a time for us to kind of recover from our event or recover from our whole season, depending on what sport we're doing. Okay, so that's just a quick summary of what this chart looks at. And this is just a typical periodization model. And this is from Strength and Conditioning textbook, which you probably don't have. So don't worry, the chart is here and you don't need to do any further readings. So I'm going to stop this recording and then you're going to watch part 2 next as I exit this. Discard. Okay.